Thank you. Thanks, everybody. It's great to be here. This is my first time at Fuse. So as a scientist, this is a little bit outside my realm, so it's great, great to be here. So as you said, I consider myself a fashion technologist or a fashion scientist. And usually when I say that, people say, what is that and how do you become one? It is a new kind of profession. And basically, the journey was not intentional, but obviously came from a lot of different interdisciplinary parts. Started out as a mechanical engineer and product designer, worked in the art world, in exhibition design, both for art museums and science museums, did large-scale public installations, did informal science education, then went back to the MIT Media Lab and got a hybrid PhD between interaction design, robotics, and smart materials, which actually leads you into wearables because I ended up making robotic textiles. So, and then after that journey, founded an algae biofuels company, went deep into biotech, and then sold that and started a fashion tech studio in New York City, right when wearables were sort of on the edge of becoming consumer-based. So this is sort of what a snapshot of my life looks like. Very much an active maker in the space, both between hardware, software, and all physical products. In the past, I've done things like make a living by being a structural engineer for couture. That's actually a job in New York City. This bathing suit is one of the most complicated things I've ever built, way more complicated than making a robot, between the 3D design, the 3D printing, the casting, the embedding, the embroidery, and the construction. So fashion is very much an engineering discipline. I also have served as advisor to many different kinds of startups. Ringly, which is a notification wearable I worked on for the building the first version of its hardware. Everything from pet wearables, you see Wonder Wolf up there, re-architecting the stiletto from the inside out with new polymers. So everything spanning the fashion tech space, and also some work into the art and research space. For example, partnering with avant-garde Parisian dance company to build a fully sustainable dance performance where all of the energy for the lights and sound of the theater were generated through the dancers' movements, through electromechanical costumes. So that's the scope. And now I serve as Chief Innovation Officer at Future Tech Lab, and we're a new company, very young, just about 6 months old. And and I'll talk a little bit more about our model. But the idea is to take all this experience and wrap it up into moving the fashion industry forward into the 21st century in a high-tech, sustainable way. So with all of this, what is really at the heart of who I am is the combination of this. So equally comfortable, fixing my blue car, my overalls, as, in my, 7-year-old fashionista hot pants. And basically, this is my favorite outfit of all time, and I've been trying to kind of recreate it at every stage of life. This is like the 30-year kind of version of this. So let's talk about my pants, because this is a fashion talk. So here's these pants. Now, the journey for me acquiring these pants, I'm a kind of avid online shopper, as you are if you work in the fashion industry. I'm also very sentimental about clothing. I just find it to be, it's a second skin. It's very personal. It's expression. It's about desire. And so I'm, scoping around, and I think I Googled fuchsia hot suit or something, and came up with some stuff. And these emerged. And this is in Farfetch, and it's a designer I'd never seen. And I start kind of looking a little bit deeper, and I'm like, oh, this is cool. And going to go on their page, kind of looking around more. And then get into the kind of, the About Us section, right? And here's this description of this is the woman that they're appealing to. A dreamer, the Maggie Maryland girl is quietly confident, strong yet sensitive, gentle and firm in her beliefs. She's unique, matched in her elegance and timelessness. A feminist, while openly vulnerable, she is an environmentalist, all from your pants, pays attention to detail and fights for the underdog, obsessively passionate, an optimist, and believes in the power of possibility. So I read this and I'm like, oh my God, they know me, right? Like this is really like, they've got it. Like this is the brand story and I'm in. Okay, but I'm like, they're a little expensive and they're UK sizing and I'm not going to fit, whatever. I don't press purchase. So then a couple weeks later, I'm in Paris. I'm on a business trip and I'm going through Le Bon Marché, which is research in my world, which is the best department store in the world. It's literally a cathedral of shopping. And I see the pants. I wish I had taken a picture of them on the mannequin, but I was too excited. I'm like, no way, because they're a New Zealand brand. So, of course, I don't have my size, but I see the textile. I feel them. I am in love. I pull up my phone right then and there, I press purchase, okay? And then I arrive home a couple days later from Paris, and this is in my, in my house with a handwritten note from the designer. This is a lovely experience, right? This to me is, it feels like all of the good things about the digital world has converged with the good things about the physical world to bring this experience. And really what the essence of the future of fashion tech is to take this not just as a retail experience. We're getting better and better, and this is not to talk about retail, but physical retail versus digital retail and what, the trade-offs of each. But what if the garment starts to play a role in this story that has both a digital footprint and a physical presence? And this is where this convergence of the textiles, the look, feel, the desire, and the digital footprint, knowing the story, appealing to your brand, and having the essence of that be mobile within the garment and not in a cloud somewhere, is where we're headed. So strike back to this jarring image from the beautiful textiles. This is what wearables looked like when I got to MIT in 2003. So this is actually now 15 years of experience in this space, which is a little terrifying. But basically, this looks like a computer threw up on a vest, and I would not consider this wearable in any way. And this really sort of demonstrates, where this research is coming from and the priorities of the people who are building it. They just didn't care about aesthetics, and at this point, it's very hard to even care about aesthetics as things were this size and form factor. So it's very new, and it's amazing technology, but it's awful, and for a good reason. The fashion industry was allergic to wearables for a long time. So they kind of emerged, and they evolved into something that was obviously more palatable and designerly, but they all still had this Silicon Valley tech bro aesthetic, right? And nothing about any of these devices had anything to do with how I think about fashion and how I want to purchase things. And once you cross the threshold of the body, it's a completely different experience about the product that you're buying. So for example, you can market an iPhone, the same exact phone, to an 80-year-old man or a 14-year-old girl, and they can both have great experiences with it, and claim it and identify it for themselves. Now, I don't think there's a single article in fashion that you could sell to those same demographics, right? There's no one single product that is the winner in the space. So even when you end up with things like this was supposed to be heralded as the be-all, end-all wearable, it's never going to be the iPhone, because not everybody is going to identify with this product. And that's a difference with what happens with fashion. Primarily, with wearables, we're looking at quantifying our bodies. There's a technical, like the numbers, the graphs, the collection of the data is at the forefront of the priority of the building, and the sort of device is somewhat secondary in a sense. But in fashion, emotion is the killer app. We are, you need to get somebody, you need to get that feeling that I got in Le Bon Marché that really makes you fall in love. And everybody falls in love for different reasons. And even if you're not into fashion, and a lot of people sort of say this to me, I think I have to tell you, though, everybody gets dressed in the morning. There's not a single person in the world that doesn't own a textile or a garment. And so you are making some sort of choice, even though maybe it's not conscious, right? So when we talk about wearables that are actually entering into the space of fashion, first of all, we have to think about brands that are offering diversified identities for diversified users, much like the fashion industry. There's no one brand that everybody wants to wear, and that is exactly the point. That's why there's so many fashion companies and all different sort of smaller brands, and even when you have the massive conglomerates like LVMH, they have so many brands under them on purpose. They're not trying to put all those things together. So what you have starting to happen in wearables, and there's been a lot of kind of up and down and flux in this market, is diversification. So this is one of my favorite wearables, and the only one I wear all the time. I still use it. It's very simple, single purpose. First of all, you don't know I'm wearing technology. It's a beautiful bracelet. The technology is secondary. And it notifies me. It has step tracking, all that stuff, but mostly it ties to my phone or my text, and I can get, an emergency text from the babysitter, or I can set it to when my Uber car is arriving, and things that this is specifically designed for women. When our phones are in our bags and not on our bodies, we're not getting those messages, right? So this was when we first went out for funding for this, of course, there's a room full of male VCs going, why would anybody want that? And women do want this. So the point is that this is one way that the wearables market is diversifying into, more specialized application, and then diversifying the aesthetic, right? In the same way that we're taking the fashion, that we have the development of fashion brands. So The next step is, of course, let's think about the real estate of the body. Fashion is not limited to the wrists or the ears or maybe the eyes for some glasses. I'm not going to get into Google Glass in this talk. But this is Rachel Kalmar, who's a data scientist for Misfit. And she actually wears this every day, and she's checking the analytics against all of them. But the point is that what it points out to me is that we're so hyper-focused on basically the technology designers are taking a medium that they're used to, something like a phone or a gadget, and basically putting a strap on it, right? This is not how fashion design works. It's integral to the body. You think about the materiality, you think about the flow, you think about this passionate sort of conceptual drive. And so, can we take back the body? So this is one of my weirdest headlines ever, but I'm taking back the body, like tech industry, Silicon Valley, take the wrist, I'll go to Paris with the body and my technology. So what I often need to point out to people in technology is that fashion and technology didn't actually used to be allergic to each other, nor were they diverse. The Jacquard loom was the predecessor of the first computer. This is basically what a punch card is, and this led directly into Charles Babbage's analytical machine, which is the first computer, and thus that is the heritage of this project, the Jacquard jacket from Google and Levi's. And what this signifies is this beginning of the true integration into textiles of the technology. So what's inside of this is basically capacitive threads that allow you to sense on the wrist, and it's specifically made for a very specific consumer. It's a commuter bike. For a commuter who's on a bike and they want to control their audio, right? So the headphones. So instead of having to reach for their phone and try to press something while they're in the traffic, you can program gestures into it. So you swipe right to advance, say, your music. You can tap it to pause. You can answer a call by covering it. So there's very small bodily gestures. There's a body mnemonic system that's customizable to you inside the jacket because of those threads. So this is how we start having this future of integration. And what we're seeing in wearables is that this diversity is coming about how we scale across the body. This is a new biometric yoga pants from a company called Wearable Experiments. This is Naughty X. And it has different sensing and actuators at different points across the body. And as you're going through yoga positionings, it's basically helping you, and it's tapping you like the instructor would inside of a class. So we're taking back really the whole surface of the body, and the system is smart enough to understand the spatial arrangement of the joints, and it's also, you can calibrate it to your own body. And this is why a lot of the wearable, the algorithmic design behind wearables is so complicated, because everybody is different, right? Once you get it on the body, not everybody's, the meaning of the data, so somebody's heart rate could be very high for one thing, but somebody else's is lower in the same situation. And so you have no base. The metric is always about correlating against yourself, okay? So what we're seeing is, again, this push towards different kinds of systems. Also, of course, a big diversification into health and looking at a lot more things that are much more like Band-Aids. Flexible, stretchable, washable is the sort of holy grail of the wearable tech of circuits, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But this idea that you can have very specialized systems for sensing, blood glucose monitoring, hydration, kind of going on and on, that are very specific. And then a platform to tie all this data together. So we're sitting at the precipice of a time where we've never had as much data about the body as we have right now. And people are kind of, we don't really know what to do with it. We're generating new algorithms to try to map it. There's massive issues with privacy and security, of course. But I think that one of the ways to be proactive about this inside of the industry is to somehow try to aggregate the data in an intelligent way. So this is SUPA, which works as a sort of centralized platform unit and can tie all of your wearable devices together and devices from the IoT. So it's literally a cloud platform on your body. And then you can start to calibrate against your own metrics internally. So this uses machine learning. It's an AI platform. And it also the company is also working on how do we have better sensors working with natural fibers to actually use them in conductive and capacitive ways. So what you're seeing is, okay, the shift digital wearables, they are starting to take more, onto the body, et cetera. But let's go back to my pants for a second. We haven't really talked about materials. And really what is going on right now, we're living in the fourth industrial revolution. And what this means is that the digital, physical, and biological are converging. And so we're having all of the, the research that's gone on with DNA and mapping the human genome trickle down into all parts of science and change models of how we build things, how we make things, how we grow things. Just our understanding of organisms has exponentially grown. And so what this means in the space of textiles is that we're having a material revolution that's secondary, that's part of this fourth industrial revolution. And so this is really about building a sustainable material culture for the larger fashion industry. And I don't know if you're aware, but fashion is the second most polluting industry in the world, only after oil and gas. It's a shocking number. Maybe you saw a recent article where H&M has $4.3 billion worth of clothes, which they just are starting to burn. They have actual factories to just burn fast fashion clothes. It's really quite kind of evil and cynical on the back end. It's not like fashion, it has a very unglamorous side to it. But the way that this sort of structure, that I think about the advancement of our industry of materials, is to think about these different parts. So start with reclaimed and recycled materials. What can we do with what's already out there that's waste? What can we do to grow new materials in ways that are both high-tech and sustainable? And then how do we actually start to transfer the active properties, like the properties of a circuit, things like capacitance, into materials themselves that are more sustainable and softer and flexible and have more to do with the body? So first, a couple examples, and what we do is I work with a lot of different companies and startups, both in investment and partnerships for our agency and in new product development. And so the space, there's a lot of work going on into the space of high-tech reclaim. So, for example, Evernew can actually regenerate cotton into a fully new fiber. Like they turn it into a liquid and then re-extrude it, and it's not chemically toxic. Warnigan's working on polyester. Awesome works on mixed fabric. So all these startups together, they're taking on one very small scientific problem, but we invest in all of them. They're not competitors to each other. The competition is, regular fast fashion. So we're trying to move the industry forward in giant leaps by funding all the smaller players to move forward together. Another example, this is a collaboration that we set up with one of the companies we're invested in, Orange Fiber, with Salvatore Ferragamo. And this is a fiber that is made from the waste product of the orange juice industry. It's a lovely story where basically this is an Italian company, and it came from literally a need where the family owns a large processing plant for orange juicing, and they had all these waste skins, and were paying to have them taken away somewhere. And they're like, what can we make something out of these? What can we do? And they got some scientists on board, and suddenly they're making a fabric it's a really beautiful silk. No, it doesn't smell like oranges, which is the first thing everybody asks, but it has a lovely feel. I mean, high enough quality to do a collaboration with Ferragamo. This came out in limited edition in the fall, and it sold out immediately, and they're inundated. So there is a market for this stuff if the companies can get to the right place to keep making this stuff. So this is probably an audience that there's a lot of designers in here. Plastic is a design failure. And this is a quote from Seal Gooch, who's the founder of Parley for the Ocean. And what that means is, from a material standpoint, we design a material that literally lasts forever. I mean, that's quite a feat. But we've put it into products that are meant and intended to be disposable. So that's a mismatch of design paradigm, right? And so what some of the things ways that we can think about, what do we do with this plastic problem? First we can just try to not make any more. Or try to start making bioplastics. But this is, Adidas' collaboration with Parley, where they're, collecting ocean plastic and extruding it into this new fiber that is going into their shoes. And they're sold 7 million pairs of these already. This is not a capsule collection. And Adidas is committed to, I think it's by 2025, every rubber or every material that's based in a plastic form in all of their garments and shoes will be sustainable. Will be made of this or something else that's bioplastic, which is a huge commitment for a giant company. Another ways to think about waste. Mango Materials is actually collecting methane gas, which is the waste product of agriculture. It's cow farts, let's be clear, and it's a huge problem, with the farming industry. And it's a massively toxic environmental gas. And what they've done is created a way to turn this methane gas, they feed it to a microorganism, and basically as that microorganism grows, it basically ferments. What is produced, instead of fermenting like beer or kombucha, it produces this PHA, this biopolymer that can then be turned into like a thread or a plastic or whatever. And they're setting up a facility in Berkeley. This is happening. So turning farts into clothes. Another example in this space, 10x beta. This is a research project. This is not commercialized, but they've literally taken CO2, and there's a proprietary formulate where they can turn it into a polyurethane. And they've made these shoes that are actually carbon-sinking shoes. So they call them the footprintless shoes, a zero carbon footprint. Now, more interesting story on this is shoes cost $30,000 to make this pair of shoes. Now, there's no reason this process has to be that expensive, but I point it out because in science, research has to start expensive. When you're talking about these kinds of materials, you're not talking about normal fashion brand problems. You're talking about problems and innovation that's more like developing a new drug. So that it's very, very heavy on the research and very heavy up front, but as you grow it, the cost will naturally trickle down. And that's why these all will eventually have a very positive impact and imprint if we can get over that hump in funding to try to treat these kinds of companies as if they're like hardcore biotech companies and not fashion or textile companies. And this brings up this point that let's think about how materials should match their actual, what they're used for. So, how can we in this side of this material revolution learn from the digital revolution? Well, Snapchat, we all are familiar with, okay, there's this, when it first came up, people were like, wait, it disappears, but we're trying to save everything. No, but there's a paradigm shift, that it's interesting to have something that you know isn't going to be around later. That's actually a marketing incentive in certain paradigms. And so fast fashion should work like that. If you know you only want the garment to be around for 3 months, it should just dissolve after 3 months. And you can use it as a marketing ploy, and then you can sell more stuff too. It's just win, win, win. So this is one example of something that does that. This is a new material that's made from shrimp chitin, which is the waste product of shrimp shells. The shrimp shells that Lila has turned into a substrate that can be 3D printed. It can also be sort of softer, more rubberized, et cetera. So, for example, she's making things like plastic bags for packaging. And what's beautiful about this material is that it's fully, it retains everything in regular water and soap, but it actually dissolves in salt water. That's its natural way to biodegrade. So when plastic ends up in the ocean, this is the way that's where it needs to be to return to its environment, which is wonderfully poetic based on all the problems that we're having with ocean plastic right now. Another example of this is working on leather. Leather is one of the most toxic parts of the fashion industry, both from the rearing of the cows all the way through the toxins of the tannings. And so a couple different companies that are actually growing, for example, leather from mushrooms, from mycelium, the root structure of mushrooms. And this is grown to California organic food standards. You can throw it in your compost bin, but it's beautiful leather, and they're doing tests right now with really high-end couture brands. It's going to be really exciting to see, someone on Madison Avenue selling mushroom leather. I can't wait. And then Vitra Labs, who's working actually with stem cells in much more of the process, a higher DNA transformation process with stem cells. And then this is the sort of holy grail of the new leather. This is modern meadow. And they've developed a material which they've actually trademarked because there's all these crazy laws and stuff about what you can call things when you're crossing borders. And it's molecularly identical to leather. It's made from the cells and grown basically in stasis in a lab from bovine cells. But it basically grows as a liquid. And so they can't call it leather because leather is defined in a category as the hide of an animal, and this is a liquid, and they're transporting it across borders. But beyond that, if you start to think about leather as a liquid, it means you can cast it, you can embed it in things. Like, it has a whole different material profile. And so they wanted to say, look, this is based on leather, but we're making something that is going to be used in ways that we can't even imagine yet, in ways that leather cannot be used right now. Sorry. And so adding into this space of the bioengineered materials, this is a company called Bolt Threads. And they've basically, through DNA manipulation, they grow spider silk in a lab. And it's identical to silk. It's super high quality. But this is not what you usually think of when you're thinking about sort of, where fashion and textiles are produced. And this is what we went up with. And so they're working on a collaboration with Stella McCartney, and I'll let her describe what this means to her as a material. Can you make sure this starts? I think can you press just click on it if it's not.
This material is truly modern because it basically is. It's the starting point of where we're going to go in the future of fashion. You know, this has never been done before. This is the absolute beginning of a new journey. And I think that, you know, I've always worked in fashion and respected the codes of history when it comes to sourcing the yarns and respecting nature and respecting the things that you know the planet has given us. You know, you look at silk and you look at the worm and you look at the spider and you turn to these incredible resources and you respect them, and they provide you with the material you can use and create fashion out of. And this is just the beginning of technology meeting that history in a sense. This is a brand new way to access a yarn that has, you know, it's incredible, the fusion between respecting nature and what it can bring to you and then growing it in a lab and using innovation and technology to actually protect nature in a sense. For me, it's so amazing when I went to San Francisco to Bolt Threads and I touched this yarn and I could see in my head how I could design an end result with this material, and then bringing it back to London and showing it to my designers and you know, it's just mind-blowing for someone in my industry to work with a material that is grown in a laboratory. It's incredible. And then to see how we can design and how we can make that into something that translates into fashion for something like MoMA is just truly thrilling.
And the last example...
This material is truly...
Okay. And the last example I'll use is the idea of a bacterial dye. And all of these products are created through the process of synthetic biology, which is a DNA transformation process. And in this one, what they do is they source natural occurring colors, so like natural dyes, but they remove the DNA, the part of the organism. So say it's a flower or something, they'll sequence the genome to find the part of the organism that produces the color, and then they'll put that into a microorganism and then grow that. And so instead of, again, it's more like thinking about how you ferment beer. The microorganism extrudes this dye instead of whatever else it does. And what's so interesting about this is, even though it's synthetically produced, it's much more sustainable than natural dyes, because what you have is naturally occurring color, so you're not using any petrochemicals or anything like that, but you're growing it in a synthetic way. And this is where the nomenclature gets really difficult, because naturally occurring dyes actually use a lot of resources in terms of land and water, et cetera, and you have a lot of waste in other parts of the agriculture if you're just taking the color from something that's a full plant. And so this is a way to kind of get that essence out of it. So how do we start to then transition to think about active materials, right? So I'm talking about functional materials, right? All different ways to grow things. But what if we do want to have, you know, embedded interactivity in our bodies and start to move things and sense things? We have to have this kind of functionality: transistors, resistors, etc. And so we're emerging into a new market of things that are becoming, like I said, softer, more stretchable, and using different material bases that are more sustainable. So there's a couple different companies that are working towards, first of all, creating a digital footprint for every garment out there. And Eon ID makes a thread. The reason I have a picture of it is it's literally a thread. Like, you can't you can't photograph it. It looks ridiculous. But what it is, it's sewn into any seam in the garment, and the actual RFID functionality is a twisted coil inside of that thread on a nanoscale. But what this does is it allows this garment to enter the circular economy. Now it has a footprint. You can, 20 years down the road, when somebody finds that in a garbage pail, you can basically put an RFID scanner over it, and you'll know what it's made of, which is really important for knowing how to recycle it. Like, the tag is gone, whatever. You have this thread that's literally stitched, woven in. And so this is what they're doing. They're starting this whole process of how do you identify garments and creating a massive chain, let alone what you can do with actually just understanding inventory. You can you can just run a scanner over a whole box and you'll know exactly what is everywhere at all time. Right? That's sort of just mind-boggling from inventory perspective. Other things, NFC tags, which is a different form of communication tag, but it's also a thread that's sewn in. And this allows you to interact with your phone for the consumer to actually just scan the garment, just run it by it, and you can pull up an app, you can pull up website content, and you can have a totally ongoing, real-time relationship with your consumer. You can change the data because that is stored in the cloud. And this is a passive device. What's beautiful about it is that you have to get within like sort of 3 or 4 inches of it, but it takes power from your phone. It goes through the air. And so you're not talking about a battery. There's nothing to recharge. It's literally still a thread, but it has a digital presence. And there's a whole kind of series of new materials that are emerging in this space. This is both of those examples. Like I said, they don't photograph well. There's a range of new fibers that are audio, so sound sensing and producing microphones and speakers that are extruded. This is a new process that's developed at MIT. We're looking at so solar panels are notoriously kind of ugly, even the flexible ones. This is a new bead. Literally, that's the solar panel. You can imagine this sewn in because everything needs to be powered, all digital devices, and so any way that we can collect and store energy helps all of our devices and allows us to have decentralized systems of power off the grid. So again, new battery substrates, and the holy grail. This is a fiber battery that's being developed at Princeton. So literally, that's like an anode and a cathode, and you can be woven. Like, quite frankly, the garment is the battery. Totally safe, all of that. So when I talk a lot about sustainability, obviously, but then you start to think about circuits, and they're like the worst polluters, right? E-waste. So sustainable wearables, is this an oxymoron? And I'm hoping not, because there is work going into this space. And this is what I'm talking about with material transformation of circuitry. So this is a flexible biodegradable circuit. And to give you some context, what it's hanging on is a human hair. This is absolutely tiny. This is a nanoscale circuit, and it's made of like a silk base and magnesium. There are things that can be conductive and basically have different kinds of functionality, because at its base, every circuit is just like a mixture of materials, and they have just to have different properties, and gates and logic gates are based on chemistries, right, at its base. And so if we can start to replicate those in materials that actually will biodegrade, that's how we move this forward. And this is an amazing new technology that just came out. This is what's research still, but they just published it, and this is rehealable. So literally you can repair the circuit. That's one of the worst things about circuits is they just get thrown out once they break. You basically can take this back down into a liquid, and then you can regenerate it as something. This works much closer to like being on the skin. It's like sort of like a bandage type surface. So in this space, this opens up, again, new possibilities for interaction. This is some fun research from my group at the Media Lab. And think about like temporary tattoos and how they can start to have digital functionalities. They can talk to your phone. Imagine this at festivals. This is meant to be disposable. You scrape it off your skin in the same way that you would other kinds of like you would with a wristband. But this is much safer, much better than having a plastic wristband that does nothing. And again, this is moving all the way towards inside the body. This is a tattoo ink that is a biometric sensor. So it will change colors based on different things about your blood chemistry. And so you can have meaning mapped into your tattoos. So back to my pants and this description, which I'm very stuck on. And I think that a lot of this is about a story. This is telling a story about the kind of person that's aspirational, right? And science, in its essence, is aspirational. It's about kind of trying to make change for good. That was a really good definition of design earlier, by the way. And so a lot of this is really about the communication, right? And that's why when you have someone like Stella McCartney talking about labs, it is transformational for our industry. And so what we do at Future Tech Lab is to really try to present science in the language of fashion. So this was our launch party in October. It was at the Google Arts and Culture Center. It was like high-tech, kind of inspired, but completely fashion event. All the fashionista, glitterati of the fashion world is there. And I spent the whole time basically talking about DNA. Just like wearing a cocktail dress, drinking champagne, spouting about DNA. It's like a very weird scenario. But the point is that to try to have this be a cultural and communication shift. And this is where things like branding and storytelling can really come in. And how we're trying to do it is, we run these different parts of our company, like I said, investments, to work with the kinds of startups that you've just been seeing, agency to tie big brands to these startups to try to move the brands into the 21st century. Because fashion doesn't have internal R&D generally. And then a lab where we're developing some of our own products and trying to taking lab research and push it into a commercial state. It's like the valley of death of any research cycle to get over that hump into scale up. And so, this is part of our opening, and et cetera. But I think one of the best stories that came from this was, as I was spouting about the DNA, Diana von Furstenberg was there, who's a personal hero of mine. And a couple weeks later, I see her on stage at an event, and she starts talking about DNA. And I was like, okay, we're doing this. This is like, it's all good. Like, I can retire. Like, Diana von Furstenberg just said DNA on stage, DNA transformation. And so this is, part of the model. And I think that I'm going to end with really a sort of, I think, an inspiring way to think about how this change in communication and image can really shift an industry, thinking about from stigma to style. So this is Amy Mullen and Hugh Hare, both bilateral amputees. And Amy Mullen is an athlete. So she was a champion college athlete. She's a model, and a regular human who wants to be beautiful and feminine. And she is lucky enough to have sort of these are Alexander McQueen hand sculpted legs for her. But what is interesting about this is that I met her at the Media Lab. She was visiting, and she starts talking about how she has different feet for all her different shoes, because she doesn't always wear custom couture legs. But she's like, yeah, for when I have my 3-inch heels, I did it. And so she had no pain ever. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm kind of jealous, right? I was like, and we are at this point in culture where things that used to be, absolutely a disability can now become a superpower and can really change our capability to kind of be augmented in the world. And this is a really big thing, that the power of fashion. So for example, this is a brand called Unique who works on scoliosis braces for and usually it's teenage girls. And they're traditionally these super ugly things. Every sort of teenage movie has that girl who has to wear the brace, right? And so this is a way to actually change this into a fashionable element. So this is 3D printed. It's custom made for whatever the problem is with the girl. So there's a 3D scan, blah, blah, blah. And then on top of that, it has internal sensing, so it can tell if it's working properly, if it's installed right, if she's worn it for long enough. You have a digital footprint of this garment. And they had it in a runway show. They're making it on different colors. So this becomes like, oh, wow, maybe I want a scoliosis brace, because they're cool, right? This is a whole shift in a kind of mental mindset. I'm ending here. This is Victoria Modesta. She's a bionic pop artist and a good friend. And she, all of her work focuses, she was actually a volunteer amputee. She had a childhood injury, and she had a lot of pain. But she chose, as a teenager, to have her leg cut off. She finally found something that would do it for her. And she decided that her quality of life was going to be better. And now it's become part of her identity. And she performs. She has special legs that are made as musical instruments, et cetera. And she also has a startup that is working on the future of prosthetics for women that are making those different heeled, feet to try to allow female amputees to feel feminine is a huge issue with veterans. So I want to end with a very quick video of hers, which is beautiful. I love that one. That's it for me. Thank you.